Magic is a central part of any battle and gameplay in Total War Warhammer. From the major schools of magic of the Empire to the unique lores of almost every race in the setting, magic has always been crucial to the lore of Warhammer as well. This is no different in the realm of Kislev, who believe the very land empowers the lores of magic. In this video today, I want to discuss the newly announced Lore of Tempest. While we got a tease of this during the initial days of the Brass Citadel quest, we now have all of the spells from the Lore of Tempest displayed in the Kislev Roster Reveal just yesterday. And when I say spells, I mean the names. You can find my stream coverage of the Roster Reveal in the upper right corner, but in that I discussed how the Lore of Ice and the Lore of Tempest in Total War are pulled from the combined Lore of Ice in the Warhammer RPG. So what we'll be doing is taking a look at the Warhammer RPG and the spells that share the same name to do some light speculation on what the spells could possibly be in Total War. We probably won't be seeing the actual Lore of Tempest in Total War until the next gameplay reveal, where we see an actual field battle, hopefully, or a siege or something of the sort. Or maybe just some more mechanics that are exposed to us. But as always, if you're enjoying this type of content, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Any one of those in varying degrees helps out any content creator you watch immensely. Also, if you have not yet pre-ordered Total War Warhammer 3, you can use my Nexus link in the description. Nexus gets Steam keys directly from the developer and gives them to you, and it is a great way to support the channel. But let's get started on the lore and speculation of the Lore of Tempest. The first spell we're going to talk about is Gust of True Flight. Now, it's worth noting that the order in which these spells are displayed on the Kislev Roster Reveal is not necessarily indicative of what order they will be in the actual lore itself. Take, for example, the Lore of Ice above it. Heart of Winter is actually the pinnacle, or like the top tier spell, right? It's that ultimate one. But Ice Sheet is not the basic most spell. So, and Frostblades is. So some of these things seem to not really be in any particular order. So we'll have to take some of this with a grain of salt. You know, Gust of True Flight might not be the very first spell in the list for Lore of Tempest, meaning it's got the lowest Winds of Magic cost, and it's not as impactful as, say, the top spell. So that's just worth noting when we look at that list. So again, Gust of True Flight is the only spell in the list, of combined both lists actually, that is a Creative Assembly exclusive spell. And there could be a lot of ways that this is interpreted into Total War Warhammer, but I think this might actually simply be something very similar to a Skitter Leap, in which case it increases speed and perhaps even gives stock to units. This would really help out in making the mobile, heavy charge aspects of the cavalry for Kislev even more punchy, because now they can get the advantage of being stalked, or they have the advantage of being hidden, or get a nice buff to their speed. A 24% speed buff would be pretty crucial. And what I've noticed from stuff with the Lore of Ice is that nothing in it is overly incredibly unique. Everything kind of borrows from a lot of other mechanics we see in a lot of other lores. And this is totally fine, but it just kind of gives us a blueprint of looking at Lore of Tempest, where we can say, hey, this is probably going to be similar to these other things that are tried and true, things that work within the system of the game. I think when we look at the lore of the Chaos Demon spells, those are going to be the ones that are going to be drastically different than things we've probably seen before. But again, I think Gust of True Flight could be very simple. The way that the wording of Gust of True Flight makes me think that it is something that is a boon or a buff to your units that probably helps with speed. It might even grant a bonus to Vigor too. Maybe it is a speed and Vigor buff, so that you can keep units constantly moving on the battlefield in Kislev, which seems to be a lot of the hitting power of the army. The cavalry is not as durable as the Empire's Knights or Reichsguard, but it has a substantially higher charge bonus and a little bit higher melee attack. So Gust of True Flight, I would say, is that speed and perhaps a Vigor bonus, and we'll find out hopefully in the near future. Our next spell is going to be Hailstorm, and this marks the first of many spells that are now going to be pulled directly from the Warhammer RPG, I believe 2nd or 3rd edition, with the exception of Swiftwing, which is in the 1st edition Warhammer RPG. But here's the description here for Hailstorm in the RPG. You channel ice magic upwards, forming large chunks of ice that fall to the ground with horrifying speed. Use the large template. All creatures beneath the template take 1d10 +2 damage each round they remain in the area. Also, they reduce their range of sight to just 4 yards, take a -20 penalty to ballistic skill and agility tests, and halve their movement. As a full action and with a successful challenging willpower test, you can move the Hailstorm 2 yards per point of your magic characteristic. Now, obviously, a lot of that is verbiage that applies strictly to the RPG, but I think when we take a look at the little flavor text there, the first sentence or so, we get an idea of what this could be. Now, this might be an actual template where you cast the spell, and maybe it's a simple Comet of Cassandora style where it just drops some hail and it does damage. Maybe it is an actual line ability where you cast in a line and it just shoots hail in a cascading line down that. And I think that latter one is probably very likely, but the debuff element of this, I think, would make a lot of sense to come to the fore, especially if it would give things that would that would reduce speed and reduce ranged accuracy. So if you're maybe using this and it drops down on an enemy, okay, they now have a debuff to their ballistic skill, or, well, their ranged accuracy in Total War Warhammer, as well as a reduction to their speed. We've already seen something similar to this in the lore of dark magic with line spell, right? That does damage and it does slow things down. So I think that Hailstorm can be embodied in one of two ways. Either a simple castable location where you're dropping a hail onto a circular template, or an actual line ability where the hail falls in this line and does damage and slows things down. Especially if you use that on the back line of archers, like imagine this, like, hey, I'm fighting against high elves. They've got 2 units of archers in the back that are just spaced enough that I can get them in a line with Hailstorm. Boom, it hits them both, and they now have a 30-second debuff to their ranged accuracy. And I would imagine too that Hailstorm probably does damage more so to light armor than heavy armor. The other embodiment of this that I thought about is also a Flock of Doom style, where Flock of Doom has a large circular template. You cast it and it does perpetual damage to anyone inside of it. It could be that exact same thing, where you cast this large circular template, not like Comet of Cassandora, but more like, again, Flock of Doom, and anyone coming into it, reduce speed, lowers their overall ranged accuracy, and it does perpetual damage to them. So, and we don't know where this falls, again, in the list of spells. Is it the top tier blue ones? Is it the bottom tier green ones? So if this is Hailstorm and it's a blue one, I could see this being right up there with, I'm assuming Blizzard is the other one that's a blue level spell, like a really top tier spell, like the tier 5 and 6. So if it's like that and it's doing that perpetual damage and reducing that accuracy, it's very similar to Heart of Winter, but probably even reduced damage for exchange of the debuffs to speed, accuracy, and the damage profile that it would have. Next up, we're going to swing into the first edition RPG, like I was saying, for Swiftwing. The wizard turns into a blur of cyan energy which darts into the air, flickering away at incredible speed. The wizard can instantaneously move 100 yards for every 5 magic points put into the spell. As the character reaches the destination, the flash of energy coalesces back into their natural form. This spell may be used to carry the wizard into close combat, in which case the character counts as charging in first round and fights as normal from the next combat round onwards. The wizard can only move to places within line of sight. It is not possible to fly through walls or through gaps too small to fit through the person. The spell cannot be cast on anyone else. So again, more RPG verbiage in there, but what I think is interesting about Swiftwing is it fits very similar to what I was talking about for Gust of True Flight. So Swiftwing seems to me like it is also going to be some sort of movement spell. Now, Skitter Leap from what is now in the Eshin Sorcerer lore, which was originally in Lore of Ruin, in its original lore, its original intention in tabletop, it teleported your character, much the way Swiftwing does. So it's pretty interesting that we're getting the verbiage here of Swiftwing matching very similar to Skitter Leap. And if Gust of True Flight is not a movement spell, then I think most definitely Swiftwing is. And I think the caveat here is that if Swiftwing is the movement spell, you're probably wondering, okay, what the hell is Gust of True Flight going to be? One thing I've noticed is that the entire roster has got no flying units. And what that could mean is that Gust of True Flight is actually the thing that helps you lock down flying units so you can bombard them with all the many ranged units that you have access to in Kislev. Now, you can make the argument that that could possibly be another portion of other spells, and that might actually be what Lore of Tempest has, is multiple abilities to lock flying units down. And I think that that might be pretty crucial depending upon what kind of rosters we get in Slaanesh, in Tzeentch, and in Cathay, because there is a lot of flying units on the board, and Kislev, we know for 100% fact, has got 0 flying units. They're going to need an ability to lock those down. We already know Chaos Furies are in the game. Unfortunately, Bloodthirsters cannot fly, so that's the end of flying from Kislev that we know from Khorne that we know so far, but there are plenty of Chaos Demons that do have flying in the other 3. Like if we're taking a look at Nurgle, you have some flies that can actually fly. You've got other units in the rosters of both Khorne and Slaanesh and Tzeentch that do have flying capability. So there's going to need to be a way to lock those flyers down, since they cannot contest them in the air in any way, shape, or form in Kislev. So again, like I'm saying, maybe there's going to be multiple ways to lock those down. And if Gust of True Flight is not a movement capability and Swiftwing is indeed a movement capability, then maybe Gust of True Flight is a flying lockdown ability, much like we get with the spell Tempest from Lore of High Magic. Next spell I want to talk about here now is Biting Wind. Now, this one comes back into the more updated Warhammer RPG, and we get you channel mighty flows of magic into a howling gale of cold. Anyone between you and your target is slashed by wind-whipped ice shards, dealing 1d10 plus 4 damage. In addition, creatures that lost at least 1 wound from the spell must pass a strength test or fall to the ground prone. Biting Wind is a magic missile. So I think of Biting Wind very similar to Amber Spear, just a laser shot, and it does damage directly to something and perhaps even has a chance to knock it down, but I think that's a little trite. Maybe it just gives it frostbite and slows it down in general. But I think that this is going to be, Biting Wind might probably be the first spell on the list next to Swiftwing. And maybe those are the 2 ones, like, okay, hey, Swiftwing is your movement ability, Biting Wind is your quick DD, your direct damage, and it's just a quick shot of magic missile. The original kind of idea in my brain that said, anyone between you and your target is slashed by a wind-whipped ice shards. I had thought of that, this is definitely going to be a line ability, like a wind ability that we typically see, even the name Biting Wind. But the fact that it is a magic missile from the actual lore here makes me think that perhaps it will be more like an Amber Spear, since we don't really have a direct damage magic missile spell so far in the combined lores of Ice and Tempest. We don't know what we're getting in Tempest so far, but any of the descriptions thus far have not explicitly been magic missiles like Biting Wind has been. So I think from that, we can take a little bit of a grace and say that, Biting Wind is probably going to be that Amber Spear style shot that does damage. And it'd be cool if it actually did damage to anything in its line and maybe did cascading damage to, hey, the first thing I hit, I do the most, then less, so on and so forth, as you go through that line. But I think, again, Biting Wind can be pretty simple. It's just straight up a direct damage spell, shooting just like Amber Spear into the face of your enemy, perhaps slowing them down, perhaps knocking them down, whatever makes the most sense for that kind of tier 1 spell. Our second to last spell on the list is Hawks of Miska, and I think that a lot of people wanted this to actually be a unit in the roster, so it's surprising to see it embodied as an actual spell. So here's the description. By calling upon pacts sealed by the first Khan Queens, you summon the Hawks of Miska. Frozen spirits of fear, hatred, and dread. The icy birds crystallize from the air and swoop around the target, loosing fearful cries. Use the large template. All those in the area must pass fear tests, and those within 10 yards of the template must pass a routine fear test. Hawks of Miska lasts until everyone affected has passed their fear test. So there was another spell called Form of the Frost Fiend that I had wished was going to be in either one of the lores. And the Form of the Frost Fiend would have been the exact same thing as Transformation of Kadon, as far as the original embodiment of the spell in tabletop was that you took on the form of something. But the way we see it in Total War is that Transformation of Kadon, you summon up a Manticore. Well, with Form of the Frost Fiend, I wanted it to be that you summon up a Frost Fiend, and boom, you finally have some sort of flying unit for Kislev. So for Hawks of Miska, I think this can go one of two ways. If I'm looking at the literal interpretation here, right? You summon the Hawks of Miska, frozen spirits of fear, hatred, and dread. I think of this as you summon an actual hawk or a flock of Hawks of Miska, one or the other. And then the alternative to that, if they do not give us a summonable unit like the Hawks of Miska for this ability, I think the alternative is that this is very similar to something we would already have before, an aspect of the Dread Knight, in that it causes a massive amount of leadership reduction, overcast it and cast it in a large area, and it does that. I think that kind of makes the most sense. You know, the icy birds crystallize from the air and swoop around the target, loosing fearful cries. I mean, this could be just like Flock of Doom, and it is a kind of a low cast ability, and there it is. Here's your Flock of Doom. But I think that Hawks of Miska makes more sense from a description sense. It makes a little bit more sense to be a either summonable or a debuff to leadership, helping to tank leadership and any of the things that that Kislev is dealing with. And if we think about where they are on the map, and when we look at the Immortal Empires, remember that's the name I'm calling the Immortal Empires combined map with Warhammer 3, they'd be dealing with Norska to the north, they would be dealing with Empire to the south. Low leadership is not overly as effective when you're dealing with undead, and we're going to see how it affects demons. We're not quite sure yet, obviously, but there are plenty of opportunities where having a leadership crippling ability could be very advantageous to Kislev, especially in conjunction with a lot of other things that can cause fear and terror to keep those leadership penalties stacked up. In fact, I don't think we see anything across the other lore of Ice that has any hindrance to leadership. So this would be that chance to have that effect. The final spell on our list is Blizzard. A swirling flurry of snow and ice rises from the land, freezing and blinding all on its path. You can cast Blizzard at any point you can see. Distant targets may require a perception test to see clearly, as dictated by the game master. Those within 24 yards of the target take 1d10 damage every round, roll damage once, and apply the result to everyone in the area, and reduce their line of sight to 6 yards. Blizzard also imposes a penalty to the ballistic skill and agility tests of all in the area and reduces movement by half. So what I think Blizzard can do is that it would do probably lighter damage than Heart of Winter, but I think it would have some more things attributed to it. Perhaps again, like Hailstorm, it would probably reduce things, ranged accuracy, maybe even melee accuracy, which would be pretty interesting, and even slow things down. Now, what I think would be pretty nifty is, and since this is Total War Warhammer 3, we don't know how vortex spells work because we haven't used a whole ton of them or seen a whole ton of them yet. But it'd be really cool if this had a very different vortex anatomy. I don't know the word I want to use. Like when you look at Ruination of Cities, you drop the spell in the center and it all just cascades out in random directions. You don't know where it's going to go. It might rip through your unit, it might rip through the enemy unit, but that's kind of what makes it a clinch, a really fun ability that can either sway things for or against you or do nothing for you. I'd like it if Blizzard, okay, you casted the spell and then it spawns one huge, vortex template down, but then off that splits like 3 or 4 other little smaller swirling vortexes that branch out from it and do damage. I think that would make it fun and interesting, and you don't know if this Blizzard is going to sweep its way through your own army and slow things down, reduce their accuracy, and do some damage to them, or if it's going to like slowly move its way into the backline of your enemy and really cripple them. Or again, it might whiff and go completely off base. I think that having that kind of random element in there with Blizzard could be a lot of fun. Or like I was saying, that maybe there are additional ways to lock down flying units. This could be an ability that does damage to both ground and air units and locks down air units for you. So hey, I've got a really crucial moment. That guy is on a large dragon mount. He's in the center mass of a bunch of infantry that is the opponent's infantry and a little bit of mine. I'm going to cast Blizzard. Okay, well, that guy was trying to pull up into the air. He's locked down. He can't move anywhere, but I'm also doing damage to those melee infantry that are, well, both mine and the enemy. I think that could be a really cool and different way to do this that is different than just simply, hey, it's another vortex ability that does damage and slows things down and does these things. It'd be cool if this had a little bit more character to it. Heart of Winter is a really cool spell, and it does a lot of really cool stuff in ways that we haven't typically seen for that top tier direct damage area spell. It's got its phases. It does more damage as you stay in. So you as the player have to be able to respond to pulling stuff out of Heart of Winter. And I think it'd be cool if we got the same thing with Blizzard, because I'm sure we're probably going to get some very interesting mechanics when we move into the Chaos Demons. And on that note, I think we can come to our conclusion here to talk a little bit more about what this all really means, right? We don't really know what is going to happen with the Lore of Tempest just yet, but I think that the Warhammer RPG gives us a good direction of what we can expect from some of these spells. Like here, take for example, this is the Death Frost description from the Warhammer RPG. You call up lethal cold from the land. A target that you touch must succeed on a hard toughness test or take 1d10 plus 8 damage per point of your magic characteristic. This damage ignores armor. On a successful test, the target only takes 1d10 plus 2 per your point of blah, 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 blah. And that's a significant amount of damage. Now, if we correlate this to the way that that actually translated into Total War Warhammer, we get the spell Death Frost that when you cast it, it does 1.8k damage over 27 seconds. So you get a very heavy, high damage profile spell. And it is costs 12 winds of magic. It does a lot of damage. It's got, what is this? A 27-second duration, and your typical kind of, doesn't show the range on here. But still, either way, you're getting a spell that makes a pretty good translation into what we get for the spells from the RPG. So I think that looking at some of these makes a lot of sense. So here's another example. Ice Maiden's Kiss. You breathe forth purest cold, freezing foes into glittering statues of ice. Those affected take 1d10 plus 5, damage that ignores armor. And here is the actual description from Total War Warhammer. It is a breath attack, and it will do 24 damage per second over 2 seconds, and it does AP damage. You can overcast it to increase that AP damage. So it fits very well with that description. It's not too far off. And I think that the hardest thing about predicting how some of these spells are going to come into the game with the Lore of Tempest is that a lot of these descriptions have been a little ambiguous, or they've been, you know, double entendres in a bit. Like Hawks of Miska I could hear as a summon, or I could hear as a leadership debuff. Hailstorm I could hear as an actual line ability, or I could hear as a AoE damage ability. Like there are a lot of different things that could happen with the Lore of Tempest, and hopefully we'll start to get an indication of what some of these spells are in the near future, or maybe even this week or next week or whatever it is. Maybe even just seeing the actual lore would be a huge step to knowing what we'll be getting with the other secondary lore for Kislev. Now, we also haven't heard anything about the hags of Kislev, and to know how their kind of shamanistic style of magic will come into Total War Warhammer as well. So all those things are pretty interesting. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. If you have any questions or anything else you wanted to talk about with the Lore of Tempest, maybe you think, hey, I think that Hawks of Miska is going to be like this, and go ahead and let me know in the comment section below. Love to have a back and forth about what you think, how some of these spells are going to translate from from the RPG to Total War Warhammer. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one, and take care.